Hey, what's going on, guys? It's Spunkify here for MMOBomb.com, and welcome back to Foreign Fridays. Now, for those of you that are new to the channel, you may not be aware what Foreign Fridays is. In fact, I haven't done a Foreign Fridays in quite a while, because it is very difficult to do so. But essentially, it's a series that I started a long time ago, whereby I take a look at a foreign game, a game that's located in the East, say China, Japan, or Korea, and I basically give my first impressions of it and whether or not I think it's a game that you would want to play or want to see come to the West. Now, sometimes these games are accessible by everyone, it just takes a little bit of finagling to get them to work, and other times they're only accessible to those people normally in that region. In the case of today, I'm taking a look at Hounds Online, which is a third-person shooter from Netmarble, currently located in Korea, and it's said to be released in the West already sometime in 2014. So it already has a release date in the West, and I decided that I'd take a look at it currently in its Korean form and see whether or not it's something that you should actually look forward to. Now, you won't actually be able to play this game normally because it does require a Korean social security number, but because I have some friends that are already based in Korea, I was able to secure myself an account. Now, what exactly is Hounds Online? Well, like I said, it's a third-person shooter, but it's basically a mix of Left 4 Dead with Resident Evil. It's primarily focused on PvE content, with a little bit of PvP on the side, but the majority of it revolves around you as the protagonist, gearing up with other friends and taking on hordes of zombies, etc. When I mentioned it's like Left 4 Dead, I basically mean that you progress through certain levels, meeting checkpoints and completing objectives, fighting hordes of different zombie-like creatures as you go. There's several different mission types. There's things like defending points, where you basically defend against wave after wave of zombies. There are timed missions, whereby you must complete certain objectives within a lot of time, either a natural timer that actually ticks down, or maybe you have to prevent a zombie from reaching an escape point by killing him. There's also things like progression-based missions whereby you got to complete objectives, either securing and defending an individual that you've encountered, or opening up a pathway for you to escape. And then finally, there are also boss missions whereby you're basically fighting a boss, almost like a raid but with 6 people, and the bosses have their own sort of special mechanics, abilities, etc. Now, when you go to create your character, you have the option of creating either a male or female character, and having a couple of different gender-specific options like changing the hair, the eye color, etc. You can change their starting outfit, but all that gear will change as you progress through the game and unlock new gear or get new gear through rewards or crafting, which we'll get into a little bit. The game has 4 different classes. They're all unlocked at level 10. And those classes are Rush/Assault, which specializes in using a shield and a pistol, basically a one-handed shield and a pistol. You'll see some gameplay of it as we play through. There's also the Combat class, which wields a giant minigun. You'll also see a lot of that gameplay. The Support class, which is essentially the Sniper class. And then the Aid class, which utilizes grenade launchers, basically aiding allies with supportive abilities. Now, these may not be the final sort of names used in the Western version of the game. Granted, this was all sort of Google translated, so the class names may be a little bit different by the time we see it here in the West. In terms of how the actual progression goes, you complete missions, you accept missions from people around sort of these hub-based areas, and then you queue up with up to 6 other or 5 other people for a total of 6 in order to complete the missions. It is sort of a dungeon-based game, I guess you could say, in that you have a central hub and then you go out in the world and complete these different missions that you queue up for. But the missions themselves, the areas that you go and actually do these missions in, are usually very varied. So different locales are available to you to progress through. I've seen dilapidated cities, subways, factories, construction sites. They really have done a decent job of providing you something new to look at almost every time. Granted, you'll be going through several sets of subways or several factories and several cities, etc. But it is, more diverse than you would expect in some MMORPGs. And granted, I only really got to about level 15 out of the max level of 30, and I saw all of these in those first 15 levels. There are more, obviously, probably to unlock and for you to experience at higher levels up to the cap. In terms of what you actually fight against and how it plays and how much it's similar to Left 4 Dead, if you think about Left 4 Dead, you have not really specific classes, you just pick up different weaponry, etc. You go into the game sort of with your whole loadout already pre-selected. You're not going to be picking up different weapons as you progress through a mission or anything like that. But you will be fighting off different varieties of zombies, and you will have different weapons that you can switch in between that you've already pre-selected. While each class sort of has its specialty weapon that it uses, you do get access to a variety of weapons that some of them are homogeneous and actually are used by every class. So you have things like shotguns, assault rifles, you got pistols, of course, as your like secondary weapon. So you've got a large variety of weaponry to have access to, and you can sort of specialize once you get your classes. Now, each class also has sort of their own special types of abilities, and the abilities themselves are either general abilities that everybody has access to, or specific abilities that are meant for specific classes or specific types of weaponry, I could say. Some of those are increased area of fire. So, for example, with the SMG, you can get a ability upgrade. That's one of the weapons in SMG. You can get ability upgrade that makes your cone of fire larger. So if you shoot at one person, it'll shoot the people around them as well. You get also upgrades for like shotguns. You can get something that would provide a shield for you or an increase in your stamina regeneration. And that sort of brings me to how the mobility works. Of course, it is a third-person perspective, but you also get a stamina bar that you'll utilize in order to sprint, to roll out of the way of stuff, and to hit people with melee attacks. Using the F key, you can basically swipe at people, and you get several different sort of melee abilities that you can actually use. You don't unlock these are sort of just like your preference. Some of them are like side swipes where you can swipe everybody around you and sort of cut down the really easy to kill zombies, and then other ones are sort of locks you into an animation whereby you viscerally stab someone to death until they die. That's a really good one for PvP because it basically locks you into that animation and locks them into that animation, whereas the more side-swiping sort of knife attack is good for large groups of the zombies. Speaking of zombies, like I mentioned, there's several varieties, although at the early game you only get access to, you only face a certain amount. Typically speaking, you're going to be facing like the normal zombie you found in like Left 4 Dead, where it's like hordes of them running at you at one time. They don't have any special abilities. They're just hordes of those guys. They melee you and kind of crowd around you, and on their own they're not really that much of a problem, but when you get 30 or 40 of them, it can be very difficult to take them down, especially alone. One thing I have to say is the game becomes increasingly difficult to play by yourself. You can play missions by yourself, and there are varying difficulties of missions, much like other dungeon-based games rather. But the missions themselves do become increasingly difficult to do alone as you get higher up in the levels, and you'll want to bring in other people to do so. You can have a maximum of 6 amount of people, and having them bring in different abilities and different weaponry really can help you progress further in the mission. So beyond the typical zombies that you would face in Left 4 Dead or this game, there are also bloated zombies, which don't really do any damage to you, but you can kill to sort of accrue resources like materials for crafting or tokens for using in the lottery machine, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Not really a threat. There's also female zombies which jump on you and start clawing at your neck, etc., and you have to mash the spacebar button in order to break them off of you and then bash their head, and it's actually a pretty cool looking animation. You'll probably see it throughout the gameplay video here. And then on top of that, there's zombies with machine guns and rocket launchers, and then there's like hound zombies, which basically look like four-legged creatures. And the game has several different types of zombies, and you progress through the game and level up, you'll see more and more types. There is a fair amount of variety, although I do think that early on you're not going to see too many. There's also exploding zombies, basically like bloat zombies, that look like they're cyst infected, and when you shoot them they'll explode doing an AoE damage, and so if you're close enough to them you kind of have to make sure that you don't take damage from that, because at the higher difficulties they can basically one-shot you almost. Now in terms of how the story goes, you may be thinking, why do zombies have guns, etc., and it's a mix between aliens, of course aliens, and zombies. So basically in the 1960s or so, according to the lore of the story, there was a sun black spot essentially, and they started searching for aliens, searching for signs or signals, and the aliens sent down these capsules that infected the general population with a virus that we couldn't fight against. The virus is what turns normal humans into these zombie-like creatures. And then they also invaded themselves and had their own creatures that they sort of spread throughout humanity. And so you, as a member of this elite squad of hounds, essentially, are tasked with trying to clear out, basically fight back for humanity and reclaim Earth for yourselves. That's the general storyline. There is actually quite a lot of voice acting present in the game. in between each missions, between you and the sort of protagonist character who acts as the guide or director for your missions. But of course it's in Korean, so I didn't quite understand what was being said. Now, in terms of how your progression-based system works, as you level up, as you accrue new gear, you can take old gear and decraft it down into materials. You'll also find materials spread out through the levels in boxes or crates that you break open. And all those crates, etc., allow you to accrue these resources, take up these resources, then go back to the specific hubs and craft new weaponry, or take those lottery tokens that I mentioned before. You get those at the end of the mission if you, say, select one of the cards. It does have a card-based loot system at the end. You get those at the end of the mission, and you also get them through playing through the mission or killing those bloated zombies I mentioned before. And all of that together allows you to place it into a machine for the possibility of getting better loot. It works like standard loot. You have green, which is the uncommon, then you have blue, purple, etc. for rare, and then I don't know if there's a legendary, but it basically works like other MMORPGs. The gameplay itself is very fast-paced at times. Some of the missions I feel like the pacing is off, where it's very slow in between each of the waves. Wave-type missions are probably one of the worst types, I have to say, because it feels like very Korean grindy, where you're just sitting there waiting for the next wave, and you're killing hundreds and hundreds of zombies. But some of the gameplay modes are quite interesting. Usually the ones where you progress through a level will have you opening up doors, setting up traps, planting bombs, and you progress from one stage area to the next stage area, much like Left 4 Dead. And having 6 people with you is actually quite fun. You can have all kinds of people shooting around, and you throw grenades, and the damage models are pretty impressive. The graphics themselves are somewhat subpar, I have to say, from what we would expect from AAA games. But keep in mind also there's a lot more thrown on the screen at once. So the zombies themselves can be deformed, they can have their arms or legs cut off, their heads blown off or bashed in, etc. So there is some damage models for you to actually take into account. There's also tons of achievements that you can find in the game. I was getting achievements left and right for getting headshots and whatnot. Couldn't read exactly what they said, but if you're a fan of achievements, there are quite a lot available in the game. Now, in terms of what if the game would be sort of fun to play in the long run, from my sources in Korea, they say that the game isn't very popular anymore in terms of its Korean player base. Not really sure if that means it's going to fail or succeed in the West, but if you're looking for a PvE shooter, PvE focused shooter, then Hounds Online may be something for you to check out. A lot of different locales, like I said. Eventually, at some point, you'll get on to sort of a monorail that goes to the mountains and be shooting at zombies that leap from there to try to get on your monorail or shoot rockets at you, etc. So they do have a diverse locales, like I mentioned before. There also are PvP game modes and separate lobby-based areas, but unfortunately it's not really like Left 4 Dead, where one team is the zombies and one team is the survivors. It's pretty much just human versus human, so you don't really get that sort of gameplay PvP that you would expect from something that was normally PvE focused. I really wish they would have done that. I feel like they missed the ball with that, dropped the ball essentially. But you get team deathmatch, assault and defend, domination, those type of modes. And I'd have to say it's kind of the weak point of the game. The PvP isn't that fun. You have the standard sort of issue where you can hide behind walls, see people coming around the corner, and if you have that special melee attack sort of bound whereby you can lock someone into an animation, you can pretty much just kill them just by going up to them, meleeing them really quickly before they can shoot you to death, and then your melee weapon will kill them outright. You do go into a down state when you get shot, and this applies both to PvE and PvP. You can go into a down state whereby you can crawl around and try to get assistance from someone in order for you to get resurrected. And if you die out completely, some of the gameplay modes, or some of the missions rather, do have sort of checkpoints whereby you can revive, and once you've revived, you can then continue on. You only get a certain amount of revivals though, so you can't just keep spamming revive at certain intervals. You will have to make sure to either purchase more of those in the shop, or I think it's on a cooldown, like a daily cooldown or something like that. Overall though, it's a pretty fun experience. There's not really a lot of PvE focused shooters out there that are sort of fast paced like this. I mean, we have things like Firefall coming out, and then you have PlanetSide 2, of course, which is an MMO FPS, but that's more PvP focused, and Firefall is an open world PvE environment. And while an open world PvE shooter environment is fun, there are some things that you can do with lobby-based shooters like this and Left 4 Dead that give it a more honed or centralized focus. Later in the game, there are big boss fights for you to do. They have multiple abilities, and it's sort of cinematic where the boss will come out and there'll be like some kind of cinematic camera pan, and he'll do some crazy stuff and like that. So there is certainly a lot of atmosphere at times, and I have to give the game credit in that respect. Would I play this game when it came out? If I had friends, I would definitely play this game. I think that if you're a fan of sort of Left 4 Dead or something like that, it would be worth checking this out. I think that the more time you put into the game, the better. And it does take a little bit of time to level up, at least initially. You don't get a ton of experience per mission. And I struggled to get to level 10, which is the time that you can actually choose your specific class. And I suspect it would be much easier if I was able to play with multiple people, but when I was playing in Korea, most people were already in their 20s to level 30s, whereas I was like level 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So you don't actually have a lot of options to play with a bunch of people if you're going to be coming into the game late. Now granted, as soon as it comes out in the West, everybody's going to be low level, so you'll have a ton of people to level up with. And I would definitely recommend trying to do it with a max party of 6. It may be a little bit easier, specifically on the easier difficulties, but it's definitely going to be required once you get up into the higher chapters. Everything's sort of broken up into chapters. Chapter 1 is like one part of the story, Chapter 2 is another part of the story, and Netmarble plans on adding continuously new chapters to sort of expand upon the game's lore and expand upon which locales you actually fight in. I was actually very surprised to find that there are several different locations that you'll find yourself in that have, real sprawled out, good areas to sort of like run around and find stuff and check out new things. And that was something that I did not expect. I expected basically to be fighting in the same type of environment over and over and over. And while you will be in the same environments in some respect, it does sort of break it up nicely in the sense that each mission sort of has a different location. It looks different. It at least looks like it's a new location, even if the buildings are somewhat similar. But that's going to be my first impression video of the Hounds Online Korean version. Like I said before, it will be released in the West sometime in 2014. And in the past, I did give you guys guides in order to play these games in their respective locales. But unfortunately, with Korean-based games, most of them, the majority of them, do require some kind of Korean social security number or a Korean phone number in order for you to gain access to an account. It's sort of really strict there in Korea. So if you have someone that is in Korea that has those, or you are in Korea yourself, then of course you can play it. But otherwise, you will have to wait for the West version of it. If you guys have any questions for me about the game, feel free to leave them down in the comments below. I'll try to get more of these episodes out now that I have someone actually located in Korea and I can get more Korean games to play. But if you have any sort of suggestions as to what I should look into, feel free to leave them below. This has been Spunkify, and I'll see you guys next time. Spunkify out. Later, guys.